If you've got $50,000 sitting in your TFSA earning 1% interest, you're actually losing ground every single year. At 3% inflation, you're falling behind by $1,000 in purchasing power every year, even though your balance looks fine on paper. But here's what's actually costing retirees far more than a low interest rate. If you've followed the standard advice to invest everything in stocks and you retire into a bad market year, you could be forced to sell those stocks at a loss just to pay your bills. That one decision, selling in a downturn, can permanently reduce your retirement income for the next 20 years. For a 60-year-old with a $500,000 portfolio, selling during a 30% market drop instead of drawing from a cash buffer can cost you over $150,000 in future growth. Not because the market doesn't recover. It usually does. But because you've locked in those losses before it had the chance. That's the trap most TFSA videos never talk about. They focus on contribution room and penalties, and those matter too, we'll get to them, but they skip the one risk that hits retirees hardest. If you're a Canadian near retirement who wants to protect what you've built, stay with me. We're going to go through 8 real TFSA mistakes, starting with the one that's actually a myth, and why a cash buffer inside your TFSA might be the smartest move you can make right now. Every personal finance article you've read in the last 10 years says the same thing: cash is a wealth killer. And for a 35-year-old with 30 years until retirement, that's mostly right. But if you're 55 to 65, that advice can actually work against you. Holding $50,000 in cash in your TFSA at 1% while inflation runs at 3% does cost you $1,000 a year in purchasing power. But if you're retiring in the next 5 years, that cash isn't dead weight, it's your defense. Without it, a market downturn in your first year of retirement forces you to sell stocks at a loss just to cover living expenses. That's called sequence of returns risk, and it's one of the most damaging things that can happen to a retirement portfolio. Here's why the order of returns matters so much more than the average. Say you have a $500,000 TFSA and you plan to withdraw $20,000 a year. If the market drops 30% in year 1 and you still need that $20,000, your portfolio falls from $500,000 to about $330,000 after the withdrawal. Now your remaining money needs to grow much harder just to break even, and you're still drawing from it every year. I used to think holding cash in a TFSA was a waste. I told clients to invest every dollar. Then I saw what happened to retirees in 2008 who had to sell at the bottom. I changed my mind after that. With a $60,000 cash buffer, roughly 3 years of withdrawals, you avoid selling a single stock in a down market. You draw from cash instead. The rest of your portfolio stays invested, and when the market recovers, you replenish the buffer. According to research on retirement income sequencing, this kind of buffer strategy can extend the life of a portfolio meaningfully compared to a fully invested approach with no cash reserve. This isn't about being scared of the market. It's about being smart about the timing. So mistake number 1 is actually a myth for retirees. But mistake number 2 is very real, and it's the one that brings a CRA penalty letter to your door. Here's a mistake that catches people completely off guard, and it's not because they're careless. It's because they trusted the government's own website. When you log into your CRA My account and check your TFSA contribution room, that number can be months out of date. The CRA updates it based on information filed by your financial institutions, and that data often lags by 6 months or more. If you made a withdrawal earlier in the year, it may not be reflected yet. If you contributed to a new account, same problem. So you see the number online, you think you have room and you contribute. Then a letter arrives. The penalty for over-contributing to your TFSA is 1% per month on the excess amount, not on your total balance, on the amount you're over by. That sounds manageable until you see how fast it adds up. Say you over-contribute by $5,000 and don't catch it for 8 months. That's $50 per month, $400 total. Plus, you've missed out on the growth that $5,000 could have earned inside the account. The penalty doesn't disappear the moment you correct the mistake either. You owe it for every month the excess sat there. The fix is simple but requires a bit of discipline. Keep your own record. Track every contribution and every withdrawal across all of your TFSA accounts. Yes, the limit applies across all accounts combined. A basic spreadsheet works. Don't rely on the CRA number as your source of truth. Now that you know how to avoid the penalty trap, let's talk about the mistake that quietly costs you the most over time: treating your TFSA like a savings account. The TFSA was designed to shelter growth from tax. But if you're only growing your balance by 1% a year in a high-interest savings account, you're using one of the best tax shelters in Canada to store money that's barely keeping up with a grocery bill. Inflation in Canada has averaged around 2.5 to 3% over the last decade. A TFSA earning 1% isn't growing, it's shrinking in real terms quietly every year. Here's what that looks like in dollars. If you have $50,000 in your TFSA earning 1% for 10 years, you end up with about $55,200. Put that same $50,000 into a diversified asset allocation fund with a 6% average annual return, and after 10 years, you're looking at roughly $89,500. That's a $34,300 difference on the same $50,000 in the same tax-free account. The TFSA is the vehicle. You still have to decide what goes inside it. Now, I'm not saying you should abandon the cash buffer we talked about in mistake number 1. That serves a different purpose. It's your short-term protection. But money in your TFSA that you don't plan to touch for 5 or more years should be working harder than a savings rate. Low-cost asset allocation funds, the kind that hold a mix of stocks and bonds in a single product, are built for exactly this: simple, diversified, and designed to grow over time without requiring you to manage anything. But even if you invest, you could be making mistake number 4, paying too much in fees without realizing it. Your TFSA is tax-free, but the fees inside it are not. And for a lot of Canadians, those fees are eating far more than they realize. Mutual fund fees in Canada, called the Management Expense Ratio, or MER, average around 1.85% per year. Low-cost exchange traded funds can have MERs of 0.2% or less. That 1.65% gap might not sound like much, but let it run for 20 years on a $100,000 account, and the difference becomes very clear. At 6% gross return with a 2% MER, your net return is 4%. After 20 years, $100,000 grows to about $219,000. With a 0.2% MER, your net return is 5.8%. After 20 years, that same $100,000 grows to roughly $308,000. That's an $89,000 difference. Not because of smarter investing, but simply because of what you paid in fees. Fees are not visible on your monthly statement the way a withdrawal is. They come off before the return is reported to you. So the damage happens silently, year after year, inside the account you're counting on to be working hardest. If you're not sure what MER you're paying, look up your fund online. If it's above 1%, it's worth asking your advisor what exactly you're getting for that cost. There are low-fee alternatives that hold similar assets. Fees are a silent cost. But mistake number 5 is even less obvious. It's a tax you probably didn't know you were paying on U.S. dividends inside your TFSA. Most people assume that because the TFSA is tax-free in Canada, everything inside it is protected from tax. That's true for Canadian income, but it's not true for U.S. dividends. When a U.S. company pays a dividend into your TFSA, The U.S. government withholds 15% of that dividend before it ever reaches your account. Canada has a tax treaty with the U.S. that eliminates this withholding for retirement accounts. But the treaty specifically exempts the RRSP. The TFSA is not covered, so the 15% disappears quietly every time a U.S. dividend is paid. Here's what that costs over time. Say you have $100,000 invested in U.S. dividend stocks yielding 2% per year. That's $2,000 in dividends annually. The 15% withholding takes $300 off that before it lands in your account. Over 20 years, that's $6,000 lost, and that doesn't account for what that $300 per year would have compounded to if it had stayed invested. The fix is straightforward. Hold your U.S. dividend, paying stocks inside your RRSP, where the treaty exemption applies. Keep your Canadian dividend holdings in your TFSA. Canadian dividends are not subject to the same withholding. You're not changing your investments. You're just putting them in the right accounts. This is called asset location, and it's one of those things that doesn't take any extra effort once it's set up. It just requires knowing the rule exists. Now let's talk about the mistake that happens when emotions take over, and why it's more costly than most people admit. This mistake doesn't come from a rule you misunderstood or a tax you didn't know about. It comes from being human. When a market drops 20%, something shifts in your gut. The urge to do something, to move to cash, to stop the bleeding is powerful. Loss aversion is a well-documented pattern in how people make decisions under pressure. The pain of losing $20,000 feels roughly twice as bad as the pleasure of gaining $20,000. So we act to stop the pain, and that action, selling in a downturn, locks in the loss permanently. I've been there too. In March 2020, when markets fell fast and hard, I had a moment where I thought about moving everything to safety. What stopped me was having a cash buffer already in place. I didn't need to sell stocks to cover my expenses, so I didn't, and that made all the difference. FOMO works the same way in reverse. When everyone around you is talking about a stock or an asset that's going up fast, the pressure to jump in can be just as strong. But buying at the peak, because you don't want to miss out, is how people get stuck holding something that drops 40% and never quite recovers. The structure that protects you from both of these is the same. Separate your short-term cash from your long-term investments. When you're not forced to sell, you don't panic. When you have a clear plan, you don't chase. Emotions are hard to control. But mistake number 7 is purely procedural, and it's the one that can quietly unravel your estate plan. Most couples know they should name their spouse on their TFSA. What they don't always know is that there are 2 very different ways to do that, and choosing the wrong one can cost thousands of dollars and months of frustration. If you name your spouse as a beneficiary, the TFSA collapses when you die. The money goes to your spouse, but it's no longer sheltered from tax as a TFSA. It's just a lump sum. Your spouse can recontribute that money into their own TFSA, but only if they have available contribution room. And the tax-free status of the growth that accumulated in your account is gone the moment the account closes. If you name your spouse as the successor holder instead, the TFSA transfers to them intact. The account stays open. The contribution room is preserved. The tax-free status continues. No collapse, no scramble, no paperwork fight with the bank. Now here's the part most videos skip. If your spouse already has a max TFSA and they inherit your account as a beneficiary, not a successor holder, they face a real problem. They may not have room to reshelter that money immediately. If they try to deposit it anyway, the 1% monthly penalty kicks in on every dollar over their limit. On a $100,000 TFSA, that's $1,000 per month until they fix it. I remember my dad's TFSA. He named my mom as beneficiary. It seemed like the right thing to do. When he passed, the bank collapsed the account. My mom had to spend months navigating CRA paperwork just to get the money back into a sheltered account. It was a painful, slow process at an already hard time. The fix is simple. Ask your financial institution to change the designation from beneficiary to successor holder. In most provinces outside Quebec, this is a standard form. If you're in Quebec, note that Quebec does not recognize successor holders. You'll need to speak with an estate lawyer about how to achieve the same result through your will or a trust structure. Estate planning is the last thing most of us want to think about. But mistake number 8 is purely about timing, and if you get it wrong, it can cost you real money at the worst possible moment. This last mistake is simple to explain and surprisingly easy to make, especially when you're actively using your TFSA in retirement. When you withdraw money from your TFSA, that room is not immediately available again. The CRA adds it back to your contribution limit on January the 1st of the following year. So if you withdraw $10,000 in June 2026, you cannot recontribute that $10,000 until January 1, 2027, unless you happen to have other unused rooms sitting there from previous years. Where this goes wrong is when people treat the TFSA like a checking account. They withdraw some money, they get more cash, they put it back in. It feels like a wash. But if you don't have the unused room to cover it, you've just triggered the 1% monthly penalty, the same one from mistake number 2. Say you withdraw $10,000 in March and recontribute $10,000 in September of the same year without enough existing room. That's a $10,000 over contribution sitting there for 6 months, $100 per month, $600 in penalties for what felt like a routine transaction. The fix is the same as before. Know your room before you contribute. Mark the withdrawal date. Wait until January. If you're not sure, check with your advisor before you move anything. So those are the 8 mistakes. Let me bring it all together. So here's the short version. Mistake number 1, don't avoid cash in retirement. A buffer protects you from the sequence of returns trap. Mistake number 2, don't trust the CRA's number. Track your own room. Mistake number 3, invest your TFSA, don't just save in it. Mistake number 4, check your MER and know what you're actually paying. Mistake number 5, put US dividend stocks in your RRSP, not your TFSA. Mistake number 6, have a structure so you don't have to make decisions based on emotion. Mistake number 7, name your spouse as a successor holder, not just a beneficiary. Mistake number 8, wait until January to recontribute after a withdrawal. None of these are complicated once you know them. That's what I'm here for. If this was useful, hit subscribe. I put out new videos every week to help Canadians like you get to retirement with more certainty and less second guessing. And leave a comment below. Which mistake surprised you the most? I read everyone,